want to introduce our next speaker. She is going to talk about plants and ethnobotany of the San Luis Valley. This is Dr. Kristy L. Duran, a sixth-generation native to the San Luis Valley, and as a professor at Colorado Mesa or Metropolitan?
So I think that was talking about when I was at.
Oh, okay. As a professor at Colorado Mesa University, she worked with CSU Extension Office to create the Ute Ethnobotany Garden. She's currently a professor of biology at the Metropolitan State University of Denver. So, here is Kristy. Thank you so much.
All right, I have some notes here that I might have to look at occasionally. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. So Teresa gave a fantastic talk this morning about some of the plants, and a lot of plants, which some of them I'll also be talking a little bit about today. So she is from San Luis, and I grew up in Antonito, which is kind of south of the valley. San Luis is the official first town in the state of Colorado. We always joke that we were actually there first, we just didn't get our paperwork in on time, which kind of carries through because I barely got my presentation to Jay last night, even though she asked for it over a week ago. So that's kind of a little bit of my history. So today I'm going to talk about plants and ethnobotany of the San Luis Valley. And so ethnobotany is really how people use plants. So I'll talk about some of the medicinal uses that the Hispanos use, as well as maybe some uses that Native people use. But I'm really going to also talk about the variety of plants in kind of the richness of the San Luis Valley. All right, so here is the San Luis Valley, as you are all familiar with. The floor of the San Luis Valley represents the highest mountain desert in North America. It is over 7,500 feet. It is pretty dry. It gets about 8 inches of rain, the valley floor, 8 inches of rain precipitation per year. In the mountains, it's over 40% precipitation. The valley is formed by a rift in the Rocky Mountains. So the Sangre de Cristos, where we are, forms the eastern end of the valley, and the San Juans form the western boundary of the valley. The water that drains from the northern mountains doesn't really have any surface drainage, so it goes below ground, so it recharges the groundwater, which is pretty shallow in that area, about 12 feet, I believe. And so it really gives rise to shallow lakes and playas in that area, and the wetlands, so the Blanca wetlands are there. From the San Juans and the Sangre de Cristos, the streams from the water there will drain into the Rio Grande, which exits the valley through the southern part down here. Let's see if there's, and then of course the San Luis Valley is home to the Great Sand Dunes, which isn't really far from here. So it's the high dunes of about 750 feet above the valley floor. It is about 40 square miles. The San Luis Valley itself is about 800 square miles. I think I'm going to get that wrong. 8,000 square miles, about the size of Connecticut. And so what's really interesting is that because of all of this geology of the San Luis Valley, it really boasts a whole variety of ecosystems. And so basically assemblages of plants, that also then define the animals that you have in that area. So there are at least 9 different ecosystems in the San Luis Valley, which again is really just the size of Connecticut. So it's pretty amazing. So here is kind of a representation of the mountains, kind of the different life zones or the different ecosystems as we move from the valley floor all the way up to the top peaks. And again, the Sangre de Cristos and the San Juans both boast peaks of over 14,000 feet. So pretty high from the high alpine desert. So at the valley floor, even though there is a desert, there are also wetlands and riparian areas, which will give a distinct type of plants that we would find there. Also, the valley floor used to be a vast variety of grasslands, but about 50% of that is now gone due to crops that we grow. Also, some overgrazing has then given way to a conversion to desert shrubs, which takes us to there's also shrublands as kind of in the corners in the valley, as well as various places throughout the valley. As we move further up, at the edges of the valley are the foothills and the woodlands, where we have pinyon juniper, scrub oak. As we start to ascend, wrong direction, further, we get the mixed conifer forest up until the subalpine fir. And then finally to the alpine, which we can see in this picture, but we can also see the sand dunes. So we have the dry dunes there as well. So these are different types of ecosystems or life zones that give rise to really very different plants, which is really pretty amazing in such a small area. Right, so of course, first people in the San Luis Valley were the Native Americans, and they had a whole host of ecosystems and varieties of plants that they could really call on for not only food uses, for textiles, for building, for making clothing, also for medicines, quite a bit. And then when the Hispano settlers came in, it came in with some of their own knowledge, but also really adopted a lot of the knowledge from the Native Americans. And so I'm going to talk about the uses of some of the different plants. So this sort of represents an outline of my talk. So what we're going to do, we're going to imagine that we are exploring the entire San Luis Valley through pictures. We're going to start in the riparian, talk about some of the plants we see there. We're going to wander over to the grasslands, and then make our way to the shrublands, the foothills, and then we're going to start climbing all the way up to tundra. And as we go through and talk about some of the different plants we see there, I will highlight some specific plants that I know some of my family has used, or some other people of the San Luis Valley have used either medicinally or for other uses. All right, so we're going to start at the wetlands. And so I'm going to have in the beginning kind of this map that shows you in the arrow as we start to kind of climb up. So we're going to talk first about the wetlands. What San Luis Valley is home to, of course, lots of rivers and streams, and we have riparian areas around there. As I mentioned, there are the wet meadows and playas that give rise to like the Blanca wetlands. We've got the Monte Vista wetlands, and so there's definitely lots of different areas and different plants. In the areas where there are those shallow basins that have ephemeral water, so water that kind of dries out, those soils tend to be pretty salty. And so you have a specific types of plants that do well there. These are called halophytes. They do really well when it's salty. So here's some examples: heliotropin, red glasswort, Alachi sacton. The Blanca wetlands is also home to a rare plant in the San Luis Valley, and that is this slender spider flower. Yeah. Along the riparian areas, we would find cottonwood and willows. So the willows are called jarita. And so if you're familiar with La Jara, that's where it gets its name, from the jaras, or the willows. The cottonwoods, we call it alamo, which is where Alamosa gets its name, is from the alamo, the cottonwoods. So willow, one of its big uses or things it's known for is that it has salicylic acid, which is a main ingredient with the with aspirin, right? And so that's often used to treat fevers, rheumatism, sometimes just colds. The alamo has some similar properties, but one of the things that it's often used for is for teeth, either teeth preservation to kind of help as a wash, or if there's loose teeth to sort of chew on. And so that would be the alamo, some of the uses of that. And then, of course, there's the cattails and the scouring rush, or the equisetum. So the cattails is not something that I currently know people to use, but I know Native Americans really use all parts of the plant, because all parts of the plant are edible, particularly when they're young. You can eat the shoots either raw or cook them up. The older ones, you can pull away the hard part and get to the starchy middle, and then ground that up for flour to make some kind of starchy cakes. The pollen is also really high in protein, and also has been added to breads and such. The scouring rush is really high in silica, which is really often used to kind of clean up pots and things for scrubbing. But there's also growing evidence that drinking a tea with silica really can help prevent the loss of calcium through bones, of the bones. So that's something that there has been some scientific evidence, but also, as Teresa said, you have to be really careful about some of the plants that you use, sometimes where you get them from, because they can take up some of the compounds or fertilizers or things that just aren't really good for people into them. This is another plant that is the sclipas, or the milkweed. I know this one as inmortal. As I started to get really interested in how we use plants, I knew how we use some plants. I decided to interview my great uncle, my Tio Leo. So you'll hear me refer to my Tio Leo because he's taught me a lot about plants. And so he, in his words, inmortal is used for everything. And it really is an interesting plant. The roots can be ground up and put into cold water, and drunk as an expectorant, also to help with shortness of breath. This one was interesting. The powder can be ground up and then inhaled to induce violent sneezing to relieve sinusitis, right? And then, of course, the leaves have been drunk as a tea to stimulate, in nursing women, to stimulate breast milk production. The seeds of this is also really quite beautiful and really very fluffy. There is a company, I think it's called the Ogallala company, that makes quilts using these seed pods. I looked them up; they're like $600. It's kind of crazy. All right, so that's the riparian. So we kind of move over to the grasslands. And as I mentioned before, really about 50% of the grasslands have been lost, but there still are some grasses. I'm going to just talk about these few, or at least introduce these ones. We've got the blue grama in the top, which you'd see. We have the squirrel tail, and then the needle and thread. Of course, you're probably all really familiar with the Indian ricegrass, right? So that's the one that's probably really used the most, or an important plant for Native Americans, because the seeds are really nutritious. The seeds can be used ground into a flour, or mixed with rice to make like a cornmeal. It's an excellent forage food for grazers. It's also a really good source of food for birds and for rodents. So we're going to then quickly move over to the shrublands, right? So as I mentioned, a lot of disturbance, kind of overgrazing, has kind of led to conversion to some shrublands. But of course, there are also shrublands that we get as we start to get to the edges of the valley and the higher elevations. So there are 4 different types of shrublands in the San Luis Valley. Each one of those is identified or characterized by a particular shrub. So we've got the 4-wing saltbrush. This is usually found along with ribes, in a really narrow area before you get to like the pinyon pines. And you also can find them in different areas. The next one over is greasewood. And so greasewood is usually found in lower elevations, I think only up to about 7,900 feet. It's also found in a lot of those drainage basins that are kind of evaporated, so it's a little bit saltier. This is all, so like the playas, wetlands is where you'd find them on the edges there. Also, this is where you could find some of that slender spiderwort that I talked about a little bit earlier. The next one is big sage, so the sagebrush. Those you find really at the extremes of the two, at the northern end of the valley and the southern end of the valley, as well as kind of some other places intermixed, but that's where you'd find them mostly. And they're found at a little bit higher elevations. And then the last one is rabbit brush. And so rabbit brush are found mainly in areas of disturbance, places that have more water, a lot of good drainage. So those are found kind of all the way up to about 8,000, almost 9,000 feet. So you can find rabbit brush quite different places. So these are the 4 different types of sage brush or shrublands that we would find in the San Luis Valley. So I'm going to talk about some of their uses. So 4-winged saltbrush is one of my favorites because it just looks really cool. And it's called that because it's got the four wings. This was used by Native Americans as a cereal, often sometimes pounded into kind of little cakes and baked. They've also been, the ash of it was used to on corn, on the kind of the corn husks, to release the niacin. And niacin is an important mineral that you can get deficient of, and if you are deficient in it, you get pellagra, and so consequently, this was really very important, along with corn, to release that niacin.
What's pellagra?
Yeah, so pellagra is a condition where your skin gets really very pale. There's a lot of pigment. Yeah. And then, of course, big sage. You've probably heard of this one for sure. And this is the one that makes that, when it rains, you have that really nice smell. Some people might really love that smell. If you ever drank the tea, you probably don't like the smell as much. This is what I remember, because I had it as a kid, drinking it for colds, and it was the worst tasting thing ever. So when I'd go hiking with friends when I was in college, I said, "Oh, isn't that an amazing smell?" And I just like, no. So it took me a while to really appreciate the smell of sage. But of course, as you may know, this is a really important, was and is a really important plant for Native Americans. It was used for fuel, but also the bark was woven and used to make different articles of clothing, as well as baskets. And of course, it's an important ceremonial plant, cleansing plant for them still. And because I know it from, as a kid, we called it chamiso hediondo. And so it was used to treat colds, flus, and as well as fevers. So Michael Moore was a person that Teresa referred to earlier. He's written a lot of books about medicinal uses of plants. And the instructions that he uses for this is to drink it, to sip it slowly to prevent the gag reflex. So that gag reflex is real. Which is then, it's not surprising that one of the uses is to kill intestinal worms. Right. What we had it in our refrigerator as a kid, when I was a kid, the reason we used it was because it was also used to stabilize blood sugars. And my mom was a type 1 diabetic, and so my great aunt had recommended that this was something that should do that. So she used to have that in the refrigerator till she couldn't stand drinking it anymore either. So that was one of the uses for it as well. I've also, my Tio Leo said that people will steep it in like brandy and then drink it to alleviate symptoms of the flu. So I feel like that's probably the best way to take it. Right? Another sage is the fringe sage. There's the couple of names for it. The Alta Misa de la Sierra. I also found that sometimes we call that estafiate. And this is also just general for stomach issues as well as for colds. And then there's this small little shrub that's usually found in different shrublands. This one, the scientific name is Gutierrezia, which was named for a Spanish botanist and healer. So hence it has a lot of medicinal properties. This one we call Escova de Vivara, or witch's broom, because sometimes they use it to make a broom. But this one was used for snake bites, as well as an antiseptic. Those are the two big ones that I'm remembering on the top of my head. I think, and then other things like arthritis, kind of an inflammation. All right, so those are just some of the plants of the woodlands. So now we're starting to move over to the edges of the valley, going over to the woodlands. And so we've got the foothills, different types of woodlands. Here we've got the pinyon juniper woodlands. And so that's the main plant is Pinus edulis, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the juniper, in lower elevations, it's the one-seeded juniper, and then in the higher elevations, it's the Rocky Mountain juniper. In the northern part of the valley, the foothills or the woodlands here are the scrub oak, as you get a little bit higher. So I've got kind of at the top is the scrub oak there. Some of the plants also that grow there are mountain mahogany, serviceberry, snowberry, and then of course this is the pinyon juniper. Got pinyon, and we have juniper in these types of woodlands. Some of the plants also in this area are ribes or garambuyo, and so that's one that we often would use to make a jelly or just to eat the berries. And then Teresa mentioned capulin. Capulin is the choke cherry, and so a lot of people in my family still make capulin jelly. It's actually pretty good. It's not my favorite. My favorite is champe, which I will talk about later. Of course, I'm sure you've all eaten pinon, right? So how many of you gone picking pinon? Yeah, that's a lot of work, you know, but it yields an amazing reward, right? The pinon is pretty amazing. It is really nutritious. It's probably the most nutritious of all of the nuts. Of 100 grams of pinon yield 31 grams of complete protein, which is really pretty interesting because a lot of plants don't typically have the complete protein, but this one does. Also, it's really high in vitamins A, C, D, and E. And it's a really good source of vitamin B1 or thiamine. So there are about, I think it's 1.5 grams of thiamine per 100 grams of pinon. And animal organs that are really rich in thiamine only have about 0.5. So it's really a pretty nutritious seed. It's also kind of high in fat, but it's okay. The health benefits, will outweigh that. Some other uses of the pinon tree is the resin, and so that is called trementina, which usually uses a poultice to help, draw out splinters, also help with infections. I don't have a picture of it here, but the juniper, also called savino, and so that one's also used for, according to my Tio Leo, to help with hypoglycemia. It's supposed to also aid in digestion. Usually the aid in digestion is the seed, is the berry, right? The leaves would be for the other, yeah. This is showy 4 o'clock, which is also a really beautiful plant that we could find in the foothills. So this one we call maravilla. This one, the roots are often used in various ways, mainly to treat colds and fevers and inflammation. I think it's also an eye wash. But one of the ones that I thought was interesting that my Tio Leo mentioned is that some people will chew on the root before meals to suppress their appetite when they're dieting. Right? So that's one of the uses I hadn't heard of until I chatted with him. All right, so as we leave the woodlands, you start to kind of hike. We're starting hiking higher and up. The pinyon becomes much more dominant, and then it starts to give way to ponderosa pine, particular in drainages where there's a lot of water. And then you get to see more fir, white fir, other types of conifers, and then you get into areas where there's aspen. So these are some of the kind of setting the stage of what we see. Some of the plants, Doug fir. I can't believe I forgot Doug fir. Doug fir is really kind of a fun one because I think it's a fun way to identify the bottom parts of the cones have like three little, looks like a mouse's foot, to kind of back to Teresa on her mouse story. We have ponderosa pine. Ponderosa pine is believed to have been used by some tribes regularly to eat the cambium. The cambium is rich in lots of different nutrients. It's also very high in fiber, so it kind of helps sustain energy for really long periods of activity. It's also believed to really only be eaten in really very lean times where there really isn't a lot of food. There are places that you find, we call them culturally scarred trees, that show where parts of the cambium have really been kind of cut out in like a square. And it was believed that the holy men, the medicine men of the tribes, knew which trees. They would select which particular trees. It wasn't just any of the trees. It was specific trees that they would choose for that. The inner bark. Yeah, the cambium is the inner bark. Thank you.
Kind of tastes like vanilla.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that they might have been looking for, because some ponderosa have a much more of that vanilla smell than others, and so maybe the ones with the more vanilla taste better than the ones that maybe have less of that. So that was one of the theories that I heard.
Sand dunes is the largest stand.
Yes. Yeah, and I haven't been there to see that, but yes, I did hear that the largest stand. Thank you for reminding me of culturally scarred trees in the sand dunes. Yeah. Have you seen it?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
I used to have to measure those and document.
Very cool. I'll have to talk to you more. And then this is another plant that I mentioned earlier, but also Teresa mentioned, and this is woods rose, also the rose hips. So the flower, call it Rosa Castilla, and so the flower is also used for like eye wash, also used for cold sores and other ailments of the mouth. And the fruit are the champes, and this makes really just amazing jelly, as well as really good tea. The rose hips are really very high in vitamin C. So when I spent a month in Argentina, and a very pleasant surprise was that you could find this everywhere in stores. They called it Rosa Mosqueta instead of Rosa Castilla, but you could get Rosa Mosqueta jellies at the store. You could get teas. You could get ice cream, which was my favorite, the Rosa Mosqueta ice cream. Yeah. This one is really also dear to me because this is one that I grew up collecting, not only with my mom, but my grandmother, my sister. We'd collect them in the spring, and then we'd go home and in front of the television, we'd clean the champe, and then my mom would make the really good jelly. So here's a basket here, the rose hips. My dad loves champe. So he goes out. This is my dad here. He kind of has an eye for champe bushes because there also can be I guess kind of weedy. So some people just cut them down. So he's always looking for them, and then he stops and I think he always has that can in his cars. And he'll just pick a whole bunch of them right away. And sometimes he'll just go do it for fun. It drives my mom crazy because she means now I have a lot of work to do. And this is a couple years ago. This is my son carrying on the tradition. We went picking champa to make some jelly. So, yeah. 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 It's basically just pinching off the little green parts on the top and the stem. So you've got the sepals. No, not initially. So that's the first thing you do is you clean it that way, and then you boil them, and then you have to smash them through a sieve to make sure that you don't get the seeds, because those seeds can break your teeth. They're pretty hard. Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. And then we've always made it as jelly, and then a good friend of mine, Ron Rail, actually says his mom would make jam out of it. So I haven't had the champa jam, which I'm kind of curious to try now.
If you don't get the pectin right.
Yes, and my mom she very rarely gets the pectin right. So my favorite thing, though, to do with that is to put it over ice cream. Yeah, yeah. So sometimes I'm like, yeah, don't get the pectin right. It's better on ice cream. Another plant that we'd find in this area is yarrow, right? We also call that plumajillo. Its scientific name comes from Achilles, because the legend is that he discovered its medicinal properties out on the battlefield. So plumajillo leaves can also be drunk for kind of stomach ailments and colds, but also it could be rubbed on to stop the bleeding. It's kind of works for that as well. And then, as I mentioned before, there are some rare plants in the San Luis Valley, and so this is one that we'd find in this area that is a rare endemic plant, and that's Smith's draba, or Draba smithii. All right, so now we're starting to climb up higher. You might be getting shortness of breath, so you might need some Immortal to kind of relieve that. So we're moving up to the subalpine fir, and this is where we start to get Engelmann spruce. We get, of course, the subalpine fir. It starts to get kind of a little bit thinner as we move up to the top, more herbs. So we've got the Indian paintbrush, we have Engelmann spruce, we have a mint here, then of course some of the bristlecone pine, as well as limber pine. This is one we call Flor de Santa Rita, and that was one that Native Americans used quite a bit for dyes, and that's kind of one of its really main uses. But it's kind of near and dear to my heart as well, because it is a partly parasitic plant. I don't know if you're familiar with parasitic plants. They tap into different parts of another plant and steal their food or water. This one is what we call a facultative hemiparasite, kind of big word. So facultative means it doesn't need a host, but if it's really lazy and there's a host, it's going to find the host, right? And it's a hemiparasite, which means it only steals water. It doesn't steal the food, so it only taps into one part of the plant. So if you've ever tried to grow it, it's hard unless you have the parasite. Its host. There's one that's of course found higher up, but there's one also that grows with sage, because it can tap into the roots of the sage to get its water. I'm sorry, say that again. So this is the parasite, and the host is sagebrush, lower down, and when we're higher up, it's the bluebells. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure if it actually taps into yucca though. Yeah, I haven't heard that. That's good. But yeah, it also grows around there too. Mm-hmm.
What's the name of the parasite?
It's Castanea or Indian paintbrush. Sometimes I remember the scientific name, sometimes I remember the common English name, and sometimes the Spanish name, and very rarely do I remember all three of them at once. But I try. So, and then we have, of course, like I said, mint, which I'm talking about here. And so there's lots of different mints in the San Luis Valley. As Teresa mentioned, there's like peppermint and there's spearmint. I just put them all under mint with well, this is a specific mint, but the three different names refer to usually three different mints: yerba buena, poleo, or menta. Those are things that you drunk as a tea. I think Teresa mentioned using it also to bring down fevers and a bath. So, and then of course Osha. How many of you have heard of Osha? Yeah, this is the most widely used medicinal plant in the San Luis Valley. So it's known as either porter's lovage or bear root, but know it as Osha. The story is that where it's how Native Americans first learned about the uses is that when bears come out of hibernation, they tend to kind of frolic in these plants. And so they can move around and they eat it, they rub it all over them. And it turns out it makes a lot of sense because it's got antibacterial and antifungal properties. So if you're a bear and you've been kind of hibernating all winter, there's probably stuff growing on you. Right? So this is stuff that's going to help relieve that. The roots are the one that's really potent. As Teresa mentioned, there's Osha de la Sierra, which is higher up. That's the more potent one. The one down is de la Campo, which is not as potent. Also, the harvesting time is important. When plants are losing their leaves and getting ready for it to become dormant, they take a lot of the chemicals in their leaves, so that because chemicals are expensive to make, they put them and store them in their roots. And so a lot of those, that's the time that those roots are usually the most potent. As Teresa also mentioned, it's pretty, it's protected because, there's been some over-harvesting in some places. It's also have to be really careful because it looks really similar to poison hemlock. So you got to know what you're looking for with this. So this is one I know that's been used to treat infections, to treat lots of colds, lots of different things. I know that my grandma always had some, and she would pin it on us whenever we might have had surgery or something to prevent infection, just have it on us. One of the other things that I heard about was that my grandmother said, that it wards off bad spirits, but it wards off rattlesnakes as well. And so when I was in college, I took a desert field ecology class. And in that class, we went to the desert, and we always talked about, we got to see snakes. We're going to see lots of snakes. And I was terrified of snakes. So I always carried Osha with me. And they kept saying, this is just the weirdest year. We haven't seen any snakes. So we did have to go to a specific place they knew had a nest of snakes. And needless to say, I didn't go. But yeah, so. All right, so now we move up to the tundra. Getting way up to the top where we're above tree line. So this is over 10,000 feet. So this is where we find a lot of really low growing plants. I don't know any medicinal uses of some of the plants up here, but here are some of the common plants you would see. Some alpine phlox, alpine forget-me-nots, snow lover, and alpine whitlow grass are also rare plants in the San Luis Valley, found in the San Juans. On the other side, here in the Sangre de Cristos, is Gray's draba, which is also a rare endemic plant to the San Luis Valley. Right, so I love this picture, the National Park Service, because it has a whole bunch of the ecosystems I just talked about, right? We talked about the wetlands and the riparian, the shrublands and some grasses, the foothills behind the dunes, all the way up to the tundra. The one thing I haven't talked about yet are the dry dunes. So we'll talk about that next, just a couple of plants here. Of course, there are some plants that are specific to the dry dunes. One I don't have a picture of here, but I think is really interesting is I think the muley grass. And that one is interesting because it grows in a clump, but as it grows, it secretes a chemical to kill the middle part of it. So it's called ring muley. So it makes a ring, and that's so that the middle part can capture water better. So it's really pretty cool. I think some of the adaptations that both plants and animals have to living in really dry places is pretty amazing. A couple of plants that we'd find here, but we'd also find them in other places in the valley that I want to talk about here are prickly pear. This is also known as nopal redondo. And this one, the pads been used to drink as a tea to help stabilize blood sugars. And there's a growing body of scientific evidence to support that this really does work. Another one is Onothera or Hierba de San Juan. This one also has antibacterial properties. People often use as a wash. This one also has a growing body of scientific evidence to support its medicinal uses. And then the last kind of ecosystem, we call it an ecosystem, or the last kind of assemblage I want to talk about is sort of the valley floor, which is kind of why I have these sort of backwards, and the disturbed areas of the valley floor. So there's going to be plants that really thrive in some of the disturbed areas that we also use. So we have lavender, malvas, the chamomile, or manzanilla. And then we have alfalfa. Alfalfa is one that's also kind of dangerous to harvest because it's often grown in places with agriculture. It can really take up a lot of the chemicals that really just aren't good for you. But a couple I want to talk about used for food are portulaca is one of them, which is, or known as, I know that as verdolagas. These you can cook up and fry them with onion, and they actually are really pretty good food, kind of a green. The other one that Teresa also mentioned was calites, or lamb's quarters. These are really high in vitamin A. Both of these are ones I remember eating and harvesting as a kid. And then also one of my favorites in disturbed areas are the globe mallow. And so this particular species of globe mallow is known as Hierba de la Negrita. And this is one that I know that we've used, the Hispanos of the San Luis Valley used, but also that Native Americans used as a hair tonic. It's supposed to really make your hair very strong and really very shiny. So, all right. All right, so I hope you enjoyed our journey of kind of walking through, pictorially walking through the San Luis Valley, some of the different plants and where you would find them, and some of those uses. So I'd be happy to take any questions. Yes.
So when you say disturbed area, what is the cause of the disturbance?
Usually like roads, so places where roads have come through and areas around there, yeah. Try to remember to.
Also, I just want to say I've used that last hair tonic.
Oh, yeah?
A lot, and it is really lovely. I was getting it from Don Chavez at the Chavez Market.
Oh, yeah, in Antonito.
Yeah.
He's awesome, yeah.
Yes, I had a couple questions about safe harvesting. I was curious, you mentioned that the OSHA root is similar to poison hemlock in appearance. Do you know if poison hemlock also grows in the San Luis Valley?
Yes, it does.
Yes?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I also had a question about milkweed.
Mm-hmm.
Does dogbane grow in the San Luis Valley? Because I know sometimes those can be confused, and dogbane's
Ooh.
Poisonous.
You know what? I have you seen it? Yeah. Okay, I wasn't sure that it was here. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be careful. Thank you.
Yes. Good. Thank you for that. I wasn't sure it was here.
OSHA smells different than poison hemlock, though, right?
Yes.
Very different.
Yeah, it does smell different.
Different
Yeah.
than poison hemlock.
I have a lot of winter fat that grows around my house and on the BLM. Do you have anything to say about winter fat? I have hundreds of acres.
I don't know of any like medicinal uses, but I know it's an excellent forage for animals. Sometimes it's the only food that they have around, so it's a really good plant for animals. I don't know of any uses for it medicinally or edible. Yeah, for humans. But yeah, Winter fat. I can think of the scientific name, which starts with a K. It's a kind of ish. Do you remember? No. Gosh, no.
Do you know what the this like prickly chamiso-y stuff is that's growing everywhere out here? And is there
I'll
any
have to go out and look at it. Oh, that's one of the sages. I think it's one of the lower sages. Maybe I got to look at it closer. I haven't walked around it yet. Yes.
I see why y'all don't want to come down these.
Thank you. You showed a picture and you talked about the prickly pear. And it sounded like what you were saying was that it's the nopal, the leaf, but what about the fruit of prickly pear and its medicinal uses?
So I don't know about the medicinal uses of the fruit. I know only of the fleshy pads, but I do know that they're really very good. You have to make sure you get all the spines off. I have a friend who makes prickly pear margarita, which sounds really good to me. But I don't know the medicinal uses of those. Sorry.
Teresa, when she was talking about Osha del Campo, as opposed to the Osha that is rare, she did say that Osha del Campo had the narrow roots, and therefore it was more medicinal. But you seem to be saying that's not true, that the...
No.
So what is...
No, it is true. The ones in the mountains are definitely more potent, and I think it has a lot to do with its ecology. So when there are kind of where it's growing, the animals that are eating it are going to create more of that. The compounds that are medicinal, and so also because they're more stressed, they have the smaller roots, so they're just basically it is more potent, but what I was saying is the time of when you harvest them really increases that potency. So if you harvest them when they are about to go into winter, to go dormant, that's when they're going to be more potent because all the chemicals in the leaves will go to the root. And I'm sorry if I misspoke, but I didn't talk too much about the Juan del Campo because there is Juan del Campo which is not as potent, and I think again is because it grows in a more milder place and the chemicals are not as harsh or as I mean it's not. They don't need to create all the chemicals that the ones in the mountains need to create. Mm-hmm. And then there's one in the back too. Yeah.
Hi. I'm wondering about how, we spoke about over harvesting. So if there's anything you can do when you're harvesting besides taking all of the plant to actually help it grow.
I think just the big thing is to not take all of the plant, try not to disturb the area too much, is kind of the big thing. Yeah. That's all I really know about that harvesting. I think there's one back here first and then here.
The question that I had wasn't really so much a question as like a continuation of the how and when to harvest OSHA. So the seeds are on the ground and you don't take all the plants and because it'll regenerate, but not if you take everything when it's
right. And it takes a long time for them to grow to where the roots are really kind of potent. Yeah.
You take part of the root and then
If you take definitely less than half, yeah, or less, yes.
I have a plant teacher named Ann Drucker, and I honor and admire her so deeply, and she taught me to stand up for OSHA and to say, first of all, if there's only a little bit, do not take it.
Yeah.
Do not take the first that you see. OSHA is what the bears eat when they wake up, and if they can't find the root that they had pre-planned before they went to sleep, they will die. This is why it's called bare root. So please harvest responsibly.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people who will not disclose where it is because of that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I know that I bought a whole bunch from the Alamosa Farmers Market. There's people that are out harvesting and they have it for sale too. So
yeah,
that's another option.
That's a good option.
Make sure they're harvesting.
Yeah.
This conversation about ethical wildcrafting, which is what it's called, is so important with all the plants, and
Yes.
especially the OSHA and others that are more endangered or less. And you always want to spread seeds in the fall if you can, and also, as was mentioned. And also with the root, there's John Slattery talks about 2 different ways the native peoples, and you're always leaving root in the ground. You never take either the main tap root or the side roots. You never take it all.
Never take the whole plant. Yep.
And you never harvest any. It's like 1 out of. I mean, there needs to be a big population.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do you know if there's a cochineal insect or something similar that exists on these, or did they ever try to raise them here?
I have not heard of them raising them here. I've seen them in parts of Utah, which, yeah, they're pretty cool insects. If you're not familiar with the cochineal insect, they're the ones that have that really bright dye. They turn really kind of red. But I have not seen them here, but I have seen them in, Moab. Yeah.
Any more questions?
It feeds off of it. Basically, feeds off of it. The pads.
So I just wanted to ask you, I have heard regarding verdolagus, aka purslane, that it is one of the only sources of omega-3 fatty acids that is land-based. Can you talk about that
You know
at
what?
all?
I did not know that. That's one thing I hadn't heard. Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
It may be a rumor. That's why I'm asking it.
I should look that one up. I don't know if that's true, but I do know you have to be. It's another one of the plants you have to be careful with where you get them from, because it can take up some of the chemicals that are bad from the soil into them. Yeah, but that's a good one. I'm going to look that up.
And they do grow well in organic gardens around here too.
Yeah. That's good to know. Yeah, because they can.
It grows in everybody's garden.
It grows everywhere. Yeah.
And it's
Try not growing purslane.
a good source of vitamin C, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
As well as vitamin A. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all.
Yeah,
I really
thank
appreciate it.
you.
All right. Thanks.